Today's question: is Christopher Columbus the biggest jerk in history? This is brought to you from the desk of the professional prof. So let's get started, and let's remind you I am a teacher and I think curiosity is a beautiful thing, especially in education, when students want to know those questions, such as who was the wealthiest person ever? Who had the largest empire? Or one of my favorites, who is the biggest jerk ever? While some people would argue a politician or two, I would argue it's Christopher Columbus. Now, there's a lot wrong with this guy. Some of it probably started with wetting the bed as a child. But we're going to start with his first voyage across the Atlantic, a journey that within a month, his own crew was fed up with him and threatened mutiny. Columbus had to beg him for 2 more days. Luckily for him, he spotted birds and followed them to land. First problem I have with this guy is the fact that he promises a large sum of money to the first seller who spotted that land, 10,000 coins to be exact. And when the seller did spot that land, I tell you, Columbus went through with his promise. Just kidding. He claimed he actually saw it the day before, but just didn't say anything to anyone. So Columbus kept the money for himself. Keep in mind, most of these accounts actually come from his own diary and letters written to the Crown of Spain. So don't come at me for rewriting history or whatever. I'm just fixing it for you. The first entry into his diary after landing in the New World, he wrote other natives, and I quote, "They ought to make good and skilled servants, for they repeat very quickly whatever we say to them. And I will take 6 of them to your highness." He also wrote, "These people are very simple in warlike matters. I could conquer the whole of them with 50 men and govern them as I please." That's right. His first thought after meeting these friendly, nice people was, man, these people make great slaves. And he suddenly became a man of his word, and he took 6 of that first day. And from here, Columbus' soldiers killed, enslaved, at every landing, traveling island to island with no morals and nothing stopping him from his search for gold. If you didn't know, he did receive a 10% commission of all that gold. And on his second trip, Columbus tried to outdo himself. He brought his childhood best friend along, who wrote in a letter, "While I was in the boat, a very beautiful Carib woman, whom the said Lord Admiral gave to me. I was filled with a desire to make my pleasure when I saw her, and I attempted to satisfy my desire, but she was unwilling, and so treated me with her nails that I wish I'd never began. But to cut a long story short, I then took a piece of rope and whipped her soundly, and she let forth such incredible screams that you would have not believed your ears. Eventually we came to such terms, and I assure you that you would have thought she had been brought up in a school for whores." You know, if rape wasn't bad enough for Columbus, his friend continued writing about sex trafficking children, and that he said, "There are plenty of dealers to go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 are now in demand, and for all ages, a good price must be paid." Not only was Columbus horrible to natives, but his rule over his own people was brutal. He ordered Spaniards to be whipped in the public, tied by the neck and bound together by feet, all because they traded gold for food to avoid starvation. He had a woman's tongue cut out for having spoken ill of the admiral and his brothers. Another woman was stripped and placed on the back of a donkey to be whipped for falsely claiming to be pregnant. And he even had Spaniards hung for stealing bread. See, this goes on. He ordered the ears and nose cut off of one criminal who was already whipped, shackled, and banished from the island. He ordered the captain's boy's hand nailed in public to the spot where he pulled a trap from the river because he caught a fish. Columbus ordered one wrongdoer to receive 100 lashes for stealing sheep and another for lying about the incident. One man received 100 lashes for failing to gather enough food for Columbus's pantry. When his own soldiers did not feel like untying slaves or taking the neck chain off, they would simply decapitate the slaves and pull the rope or chain off. And when his soldiers ran out of food for their dogs, they fed babies, the native babies, to their dogs. On his third journey, Columbus returned to find that many of the Spanish settlers were actually in rebellion against this rule. They claimed Columbus had misled them about finding gold. So when he fell ill in 1495, while the little restraint he had maintained over his man had disappeared, the troops went wild. They were stealing, killing, raping, torturing natives, trying to force them to divulge the whereabouts of these imaginary houses of gold. Once recovered, Columbus organized his troops and formed a squadron of several hundred heavily armed men and more than 20 attack dogs. The men tore across the land, killing thousands of sick and unarmed natives. Soldiers would use their captives for sword practice, attempting to decapitate them or even cut them in half with a single blow. Ironically, the summer of 2020 decapitated Columbus. Columbus had an economic interest in the enslavement of the natives. Back then, you couldn't enslave another Christian, so Columbus just refused to baptize them. This did upset many of the clergy. In an entry in his journal, Columbus wrote, "From here one might send, in the name of the Holy Trinity, as many slaves as could be sold." When the slaves began to die at high rates, Columbus ordered all natives over the age of 13 to collect a thimble of gold powder every 3 months. And if you did not, your hands were amputated and you were left to bleed to death at the age of 13. By 1500, the crown had enough. They removed him as governor, arrested, and transported him in chains back to Spain. After all this, many would ask, why didn't anybody fight back? Some did. After an attack by more than 2,000 Indians, Columbus had a soldier bring him 3 Indian leaders whom he had publicly beheaded in front of everybody. The same Spaniard ordered another man to grab another Indian, bring him to the middle of his village, and cut off his ears in retribution for the Indians failing to be helpful to the Spaniards digging a stream. When natives did attempt at all, they were taken prisoner, hung, burnt to death. Desperation led to mass suicides and infanticide among the natives. In just the first 2 years under Columbus' governorship, more than half of the 250,000 natives in Haiti alone were dead. In the end, over 50,000 succumbed to suicide alone. Indians destroyed their stores of bread so that they couldn't eat them, neither could Columbus and his men. They plunged off cliffs and poisoned themselves with roots. They starved themselves to death. Oppressed by an impossible requirement to deliver so much gold, the Indians no longer were able to tend to their fields or care for the sick, children, or elderly. They had given up and committed mass suicide to avoid being killed and captured by Christians who, to avoid sharing the land with them, their fields, groves, beaches, forests, and women, and the future of their own people. In case you're wondering, Spain actually let Columbus go, and even sponsored another voyage for him to find, you guessed it, the Indian Ocean. But while exploring, a hurricane found Columbus. Columbus tried to get back to his mainland, but was denied port because the governor in Hispaniola hated him so much. He got stranded in Jamaica. As Spaniards and natives swam over to Hispaniola to get help, but the new governor hated Columbus too. He slowed all efforts to rescue Columbus, and Columbus was stuck there for over a year. Meanwhile, Columbus had a trick in local natives to give him food. He predicted lunar eclipses using his charts in order that they wouldn't turn on him. Columbus was eventually rescued and paid for passage back to Europe. This was his final journey, but his legacy was created. One historian asserts that, and I quote, Columbus not only sent the first slaves across the Atlantic, he probably sent more slaves than any other individuals, and other nations rushed to emulate Columbus. Remember, only 30 years later, Cortez lands in Mexico to deal with the Aztecs. Modern estimates for pre-Columbian population of the islands was about 300,000. But 56 years after Columbus landed, fewer than 500 were left on the island. And yeah, some did die of a disease. However, this is the biggest problem when discussing Europeans' arrival. Too often, instructors in America will focus on the lives lost due to smallpox while overshadowing the murdering and torturing of Columbus. Finally, let me leave you with this thought. A Harvard historian known for his multi-volume biography on Columbus said this, and I quote, "The cruel policy initiated by Columbus and pursued by his successors resulted in complete genocide," end quote. If you ever doubt this debate, just remember another jerk from history, Hitler. And remember that he openly praised the success of the Native American genocide.